I request everyone to be kindly seated. Our esteemed chief guest and the dignitaries on the dais shall be entering the hall soon. I request everyone to kindly rise. Namaskar. A very good morning to all present. I, on behalf of the Honorable Juvenile Justice Committee of the Supreme Court of India, take this privilege to warmly welcome all our esteemed guests to the inaugural session of the National Annual Stakeholders Consultation on Protecting the Rights of Children Living with Disability, with special focus on children in conflict with law and children in need of care and protection, and the intersectionality of disabilities. The significance of this consultation cannot be overstated, as it will offer an opportunity to all of us to stand together and reflect on our shared mission of protecting rights of children, especially those with disabilities, to engage in meaningful dialogue to discuss intersectional approaches to protecting children's rights, to share successful interventions and strategies for doing so, to identify gaps and challenges in the existing frameworks, and to develop actionable recommendations for policy and for practice. We are extremely honored to have amidst us Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Srimati Annapurna Devi, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, Government of India, Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna, Judge, Supreme Court of India and Chairperson of the Juvenile Justice Committee, Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative, UNICEF India, Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court of India, Honorable Chairpersons of the Juvenile Justice Committees and Honorable Judges of the High Courts, Honorable Chairpersons and members of the National and State Commissions for Protection of Child Rights, Secretaries and Senior Officers from the Union and State Governments, Learned Secretary General and Registrars of the Supreme Court and different High Courts, Learned Member Secretaries of National and State Legal Services Authorities, Learned Chairpersons and faculty members of the National and State Judicial and Police Academies, Senior Police Officers, representatives from NIMHANS, members from the District Judiciary, Juvenile Justice Boards and Child Welfare Committees, the entire UNICEF India team, and all other esteemed guests and participants. Your gracious presence here adds immense value to this hallowed occasion, and it is a testament to your commitment to the cause of child rights. Your presence here reinvigorates our resolve to strive harder to protect children's rights. Before proceeding ahead, I request Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna to present a token of respect to Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. May I now request request Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna to present a token of respect to Srimati Annapurna Devi, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, Government of India.
Thank you for coming.
May I now request Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna to present a memento to Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative, UNICEF, India. May I now request Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey to present a small token of respect to Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna, Chairperson, Juvenile Justice Committee, Supreme Court. May I now request Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna, who is known not just for her erudition, but also for her unswerving commitment to the cause of child rights and juvenile justice, to kindly deliver the opening address.
Namaskar and a very good morning to everybody. Honorable Dr. Justice Dhananjay Yashwant Chandrachud, Chief Justice of India, Srimati Annapurna Devi, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, my esteemed colleagues of the Supreme Court of India, Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative, UNICEF, India, Honorable Judges who are chairpersons and members of the Juvenile Justice Committee and POCSO Committees of the High Courts, Secretaries and officers from concerned ministries, Government of India and state governments, Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disability, Government of India, and State Commissioners for Persons with Disabilities, Secretary General and Learned Registrars of the Supreme Court of India, Mr. Gopal Mitra, UNICEF Global Lead on Disability and Development in Program Group, New York Headquarters, experts and panelists, representatives from the NCPCR and State Commission for Protection of Rights, representatives from law schools, member secretaries, conveners of juvenile justice and POCSO committees of high courts, Ms. Soledad Herrero, Chief of Child Protection UNICEF, and representatives of Team UNICEF in India, distinguished invitees, members from the media, ladies and gentlemen. I took a minute or two to state all these names because at the outset I must say that it is promising and reassuring that we have with us the support and commitment of all the dignitaries gathered here today as we strive towards the progressive realization of child rights from an intersectional and comprehensive perspective. My thanks to each one of you for your esteemed presence at the 9th National Stakeholders Consultation on Child Protection, being organized under the aegis of the Juvenile Justice Committee, Supreme Court of India, in association with UNICEF in India. I welcome all the dignitaries and distinguished invitees present here on behalf of the Juvenile Justice Committee of the Supreme Court of India. I express my gratitude to Honorable Chief Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, for accepting our invitation to inaugurate this national consultation and to deliver the inaugural address, despite his extremely busy schedule. He would speak from his heart on his experience with fostering two daughters, Priyanka and Mahi, with disabilities. I welcome the Honorable Minister, Ms. Annapurna Devi, for taking the time to grace the occasion. the Ministry of Women and Child Development is something very close to our heart. Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative UNICEF, is extended a warm welcome. I thank my esteemed colleagues for their gracious presence. The chairpersons and members of the Juvenile Justice Committees and POCSO Committees are extended a warm welcome, and so also the members of the said committees. Mr. Gopal Mitra, UNICEF Global Lead on Disability and Development in Program Group, New York Headquarters, has been kind enough to be present here for this consultation and to be a panelist. All the distinguished invitees, panelists, experts and delegates are welcome to this consultation. I hope we would have a deep and meaningful engagement with this year's theme, identified as Protecting the Rights of Children Living with Disability, focus on CICL and CNCP, and intersectionality of disabilities. From the lens of a transformative constitution and judges discharging duties under it, it was felt that the judicial apparatus must make positive efforts to take the march of administrative step up forward when it comes to core issues of social governance. We must all acknowledge and take this innovative interinstitutional dialogue forward. In this spirit, I convey my heartfelt appreciation for your contribution to the theme this year as a national endeavor led by the State Juvenile Justice and POCSO Committees of the State High Courts with equal collaboration from nodal departments, agencies and academies. We started the process for juvenile justice consultation in March this year with identifying the theme and the areas which could be prioritized for focus this year. After due deliberations on the inputs received, the focus areas for this year were identified within the larger theme of protection services for children with disabilities. To be able to get a pragmatic sense of the on-ground challenges and progress in both policy and practice, we introduced disability disaggregation on identified indicators from data to review progress and to understand better obstacles in justice for children in conflict with the law. In addition, we introduced some key indicators specific to services and schemes for children with disabilities within the juvenile justice system, pertaining to both children in need of care and protection and children in conflict with the law. We thank all the states for their timely submission of the data and hope that the states have reviewed it to be able to better inform policy and practice. These will be included in the report to be published as an aftermath to the national consultation. In a world where resources are limited and competing priorities abound, ensuring that policies affecting children living with disabilities are grounded in robust data and rigorous research is paramount. In this context, a quote from Judith Hoyman's book, Being Hoyman, is most instructive. She contracted polio in 1949 in Brooklyn, New York, and began to use a wheelchair for her mobility. She said, and I quote, "I think what people miss sometimes when they are thinking about disabled people is our vulnerability. Our continued need for help as disabled adults makes us vulnerable. Over 80% of women with disabilities will be sexually abused in our lifetimes, which is about 4 times the rate among non-disabled women. What is even worse is that people don't believe us when it happens. They use our inability to speak or our developmental disabilities as reasons not to believe us," unquote. The above quote captures the importance of adopting an intersectional approach when we look at issues of social justice, a facet of which are children living with disability. Article 15(3) of the Constitution of India is the article of faith for women and children of this country. There can be no manner of doubt that the Juvenile Justice Act, the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act are but instantations of the constitutional philosophy of social justice. As per Article 45 and 47 of the Indian Constitution, the state is obliged to not just treat public education and health as its primary duty, but also make all possible efforts to ensure equitable access to education and healthcare services. Thus, we must give our anxious consideration to the question of how effectively have the provisions in the Rehabilitation Council of India Act 1992, the National Trust Act 1999 for Autism, and the RPWD Act concerning the protection of children with disabilities have been implemented so far. How far have we come in realizing the socio-economic rights of children with disabilities? According to the UNICEF fact sheet, Children with Disabilities, August 2022, such children are disproportionately living in childcare institutions, with some estimates showing that up to 25% of all young people in such facilities having intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions. The mortality rate for children with disabilities in institutional care is several times higher than for other children, as per this study. Children with disabilities can face stigma, along with negative attitudes and beliefs that place them at an increased risk of violence and neglect, abuse and exploitation, among others. Violent forms of discipline can also be driven by prevailing attitudes towards disability itself. We must take stock of what is the number of children with disability belonging to economically weaker sections who have secured admissions in private schools under Section 12 of the RTE Act. Otherwise, they would be prone to be abandoned, surrendered, or married early by parents, guardians, and community members due to the additional stress perceived by providing care. As per UDICE 2021-2022, only 2.26 million children with disabilities were enrolled in schools, which is 0.9% of the total enrollment. Within this reality, intersectionality with gender or from gender identities across the LGBTQ spectrum puts children at additional vulnerabilities. Moreover, our social biases often show in the way in which we refer to persons with disabilities and children with disabilities. In popular culture mediums, disabilities are often villainized or caricatured. This speaks volumes of not only our blind spots, but also the stigmas and taboos associated with disabilities present and perpetrated. The time for action is now. In a recent landmark judgment by Honorable Chief Justice of India, Dr. Chandrachud, and Brother Justice Padiwala, held that, quote, language that individualizes the impediment and overlooks the disabling social barriers. Example, terms such as afflicted, suffering, and victim should be avoided or adequately flagged as contrary to the social model. I am grateful to Honorable the Chief Justice of India and the Supreme Court's Committee on Accessibility for guiding us on the actual path towards removing these semantic barriers with the handbook concerning persons with disability, which is being released today. Recognizing the constitutional intent of ensuring substantive equality for persons with disabilities, the handbook extrapolates the spirit and structure of extant legislative framework. I find great comfort that decision makers and institutions will find instructive the handbook's exposition of possible reasonable accommodations that could be provided for the benefit of persons with disabilities. It is my deepest hope that stakeholders and readers will sincerely imbibe the principles on semantics for referring to persons with disabilities and individuals with mental health conditions that have been painstakingly enunciated in the chapter. The way ahead is not to assume that we can be the sole guardians of the experience and voices of children living with disabilities, but instead to provide an unconditional and accommodating platform that allows them to themselves elevate their individual and shared experiences on an equal basis with other children. In that light, I am proud that the mission statement of this year's national consultation, Invisible No More, a statement of inclusion by children with disabilities, has been also prepared. Children and persons with disabilities struggle because of the intersection of a vulnerability with a barrier. If barriers are removed, children become part of society with equal access to opportunities. Thus, policies should focus on removing these, such as inaccessible social services and systems, lack of access to assistive technology, lack of accessible communication formats, and limited support for their parents or caregivers. Removing barriers entails ensuring that our schemes and services are inclusive and that they factor in reasonable accommodation. What this means in terms of protection services for children is having in-depth understanding of the situation for children with disabilities, having access to the right information, updated data, and knowledge sources. This would entail having regular and relevant surveys, introducing disability indicators as per the RPWD Act, and appropriate outreach services with identification, early diagnosis, and referral systems established. This holds true for both children in the community and children residing in institutions. Ensuring ease of access to identification, referral, medical, legal, educational, counseling, and assistive services for children with disabilities. Ensuring enhanced social security to families of children with disabilities by way of reasonable accommodation. Focusing on breaking the stigma around disabilities. Often the bullying faced by children in communities, homes, schools, and neighborhoods increases mental distress to these children and leads to their retraction from social life and oftentimes dropping out of schools, increasing their chances of becoming children in need of care and protection, and even children in conflict with the law. The juvenile justice system, with its emphasis on being inclusive, of ensuring social safety nets for all children, should be looking at the range of these services with even greater emphasis. This would warrant greater convergence between departments, services, and schemes. Specifically for children in conflict with law, it would be of utmost importance to ensure justice for children with disabilities instead of criminalizing their disabilities, which well may happen, especially in the case of learning and intellectual disabilities. This requires all our attention. I appeal to this eminent assembly to draw force from the words of Stephen Hawking, the world-renowned physicist who demonstrated that living with disability need not be an obstacle to success. He acknowledged that it was his support ecosystem that emboldened him to fruitfully achieve productive employment and personal fulfillment, as he called. Desiring the same for others living with disabilities, he said, and I quote, "We have a moral duty to remove the barriers to participation and to invest sufficient funding and expertise to unlock the vast potential of people with disabilities. Governments throughout the world can no longer overlook the hundreds of millions of people with disabilities who are denied access to health, rehabilitation, support, education, and employment and never get the chance to shine," unquote. I hope the two-day national deliberations, along with the preceding discussions at the state level, will help pave the way for concrete action plans and commitments which we can see to fruition over the years. The momentum we are able to build this year can be instrumental for the change we can catalyze collectively in improving protection services for children with disabilities. At this juncture, I must express my deepest gratitude to Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, for his leadership, imbued with compassion and sensitivity in cases and initiatives targeted towards justice and children. I request that we all give a standing ovation to our Chief Justice for his guidance and for his experience. Thank you. I have taken a few minutes more. I pray for the excuse. I thank you all for your kind attention. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Your address has ignited a flicker of hope and compassion in the hearts of all who are fortunate enough to be here in attendance today. Your address was indeed a profound call to collective action to build a more inclusive, compassionate, and just society where every individual, regardless of ability, can survive, revive, and thrive. UNICEF India has always been instrumental in lending its support in the journey of protection of child rights. Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, as country representative, UNICEF India, has relentlessly championed the cause of child rights. On this special occasion, I request Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey to kindly share her reflections and thoughts drawn from the wealth of wisdom and experience that she has garnered over the years.
Sabiko Mare Namaste. Honorable, don't applaud yet, but that was pretty good for me. Honorable Dr. Justice Chandrachud, Ms. Devi, the Honorable Minister of Women and Child Development, Mrs. Justice Nagaratna, Honorable Chairperson of Juvenile Justice Committee and Judge Supreme Court of India. On behalf of UNICEF, I thank the Honorable Supreme Court and High Court's leadership for a decade of commitment to elevate attention to children's rights across India, and for this year's focus on building an inclusive society for children living with disabilities. Today, UNICEF is truly humbled and honored for the opportunity to be with the national and state dignitaries and the key stakeholders responsible for advancing children's rights across India. This year marks 75 years of UNICEF's partnership with the government and people of India, and we're proud to have worked alongside you advancing children's rights and to be here to stay with you as you continue that journey. I offer UNICEF's appreciation to the Minister of Women and Child Development and the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment for spearheading the Government of India's efforts and working hand in hand with many ministries and departments who are here today for this consultation and taking us forward even further. And most importantly, following the motto, "Nothing about us without us," the cornerstone of the movement for respectful inclusion of persons with disabilities, children, and young people present here today, for the role that you have all played in the preparation and in the important state consultations, and for always reminding us that their voices, that their aspirations are an important guide for all of our deliberations. Toward that end, and picking up on our honorable chairperson's points, I wanted to make a few key points as we continue with our deliberations. And first, why this agenda is so important. First, because protecting children with disability is not simply about the right thing to do. It's our collective accountability to protect the rights of every child. Therefore, it's an accountability that we're coming together to achieve. Secondly, it makes socioeconomic sense. Investing in education yields a remarkably high return, with returns 3 times higher for children with disability as compared to the general population. And third, as we just heard, there's still a large agenda to tackle. A global data report reveals that 1 in every 10 children in the world have a disability. But that report goes on to not just talk about the sheer numbers, but the impact of those children's lives that they're leading. They are more likely, a child living with a disability, to never have attended school. They're more likely to feel unhappy or to experience severe corporal punishment. And these global intersections of child protection are well documented, and it's important that we understand them as we come up with the solutions and move forward. The statistics that we heard about institutions and institutionalization of children. 1 in 3 children in institutions globally across the world is a child living with a disability. And children with disabilities are 4 to 6 times more likely to be detained, and girls living with disabilities are 1.7 times more likely to be married. So that's why this is important. We're protecting children's rights, there's a socioeconomic investment, and we have a big agenda. Secondly, we have a strong foundation on which to build. India's national commitment is serious and real. India was one of the first signatories to the Convention on the Rights of Persons Living with Disabilities in 2007. The first human rights treaty of the 21st century. With that, over the next decade, India advanced a solid policy and legal architecture to protect people with disabilities. The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016 signaled an important shift from viewing persons with disabilities from a welfare medical perspective to one with a human rights approach. India has continued with its National Policy for Children in 2013, the National Education Policy 2020, that reiterates the government's commitment to protecting the rights and well-being of children with disabilities and ensuring access to protection services, to inclusive education. The Mission Vatsalya, Juvenile Justice Act, and POCSO Act prioritize the best interest principle for all children, aiming to create a comprehensive social safety net. That brings me to my third point, and one of the most important for why we're all here: recognizing this big agenda, coming together with the collective responsibility and action to remove those barriers. And it is possible. When I look out in the audience and I see Gauranshi Sharma, a 16-year-old adolescent from Bhopal, with the unwavering support of her parents, she became a badminton champion, represented India, and won the gold medal in Deaflympics. She became a UNICEF ambassador, youth ambassador this year, and advocated across India around inclusion. She just got back from New York, where she took India's message about what we're trying to do to include children living with disabilities, addressing and delivering that message to global leaders at the UN General Assembly. She reminds us, and people with disabilities remind us, that we can take specific actions, come together. First, looking at the issue of convergence. And over my 2 years here, I've learned a great deal about convergence from India. And the Ministry of Women and Child Development looks carefully at the whole child. So as we look at how we address children living with disability, we consider their health, but also their education, their protection, mental health, the need for legal aid. The convergence goes beyond what the child needs, but how do we come together, cutting across states, cutting across public sector, private sector, NGOs with the public sector, academia. All of these to come together for looking at how we have inclusive practices and policies. And when I think of this, I see starlings and how they fly. Up to 1 million starlings can fly in a pattern, and they do that by coming together, identifying the barriers and the hurdles, and leading and following each other to overcome them. Second is specialization. A skilled and specialized workforce is essential for the full inclusion and care and protection of children with disability. Having that double track where we provide access for those who are living with disabilities into the mainstream services, but have a dedicated, well-trained workforce who can identify the issues and with expertise enable them to overcome and still soar. Third is the prevention and early detection. Many and most of the causes of disabilities are preventable and are secondary impacts of disabilities. I saw this in real life when I visited Narmada district in Gujarat, where they have taken the power of looking at early detection at every important stage of a child's life, at birth, and then throughout the milestones during those formative years, screening children, identifying early, and then supporting them and their families, and embedding the 4 Ds, defects, diseases, deficiencies, and development delays. Being able to do that in a systematic way can transform the trajectory of a child's life as well as the family's life. Fourth, as we deliberate, is looking at families. Report and data again and again notes the damage of growing up in institutional settings and is globally well documented the importance of being in a safe family environment. That's why it is codified in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In 2019, the General Assembly focused on this with a momentous consensus by unanimously adopting the global resolution focusing on the right to live in a family environment. Children with disabilities have a right to grow up in a safe and family environment. And we've heard that many of them are often in institutions. How do we build the systems, the protections that enable them with the support to them and the support to their families, to the caregivers, to remain in family settings. And fifth, inclusion. It's our collective responsibility to create an inclusive environment. And let me end there, because I think this codifies and captures everything. How do we create, through the policies, the legal architecture, the systems, to create an inclusive system? Yesterday, UNICEF had the opportunity with the UN to meet with a number of organizations working with children and people living with disabilities. And one of them recounted a story and said, a few years ago, we were planning for the Global Disability Day. And we said to each other, the adults, what should we do? And one of them said, I'm going to ask the children what they want to do. She came back, she said, I asked the children, what do you want to do? And they said, we'd like to go to the beach. We'd like to have a party and get together with our friends. Or maybe we could have a concert or go to a concert and enjoy music. I thought that was a very telling reminder. Children with disabilities are children, first and foremost. They want to play. They want to learn. They want to live. They want to listen. They know they're going to fall down, and they want someone to pick them up and help them. So first and foremost, we're doing all this to make sure that children have the opportunity everywhere, no matter what their ability, where they're from, to make sure that they have the systems that helps them to soar, to fly, because that's what a child does. They just run with force into life. I'm going to end with a quote from the American entrepreneur Mary Kay Ash. Aerodynamically, it is impossible for the bumblebee to fly. But the bumblebee doesn't know this, and so it flies anyway. UNICEF is honored to be working alongside you to help every child fly anyway.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your valuable and well-meaning insights, which show that all development actors need to urgently adopt intersectionality as an overarching approach in their programs, strategies, and action plans to ensure disability inclusion. I'm sure that after attending this national consultation and hearing your words of wisdom, we shall all strive to look at children with disabilities with a multi-dimensional prism and collectively resolve to work together to create a better future for all of them. Documentaries are like a mirror that reflects to us our own humanity, our triumphs, our flaws, and our potential for growth. It is with this thought in mind that we are releasing a documentary film on children with disabilities, which shows that children with disabilities have an equal right of participation and inclusion, and that the onus is on all of us to collectively ensure that these rights are realized in their true letter and spirit. This thought-provoking documentary shall show that the ability of children with disabilities is not limited, but maybe our imagination is. This documentary shall nudge and gently cajole us to listen to and amplify the voices of these children. As we watch this documentary, many of the stereotypical notions and assumptions that we have regarding the children with disabilities shall be challenged and our empathy ignited. This 8 minutes long documentary shall inspire all of us to embrace diversity and inclusion. May we now have the documentary played.
Children with disability, like all other individuals with disability, are capable of leading dignified lives. They're able to participate fully in society if only we give them that opportunity to do so on an equal platform.
पहले हमको पढ़ाई शुरू करने में बहुत कठिनाई गरीबाई थी, तो बहुत कठिनाई होती थी। जब बच्ची का सहायता राशि मिलने लगी कुछ मदद के रूप में, तो फिर हमको पढ़ाने लिखाने में बहुत अच्छा सुविधा पड़ी है। तो मेरी सोच है कि हम बच्चे को पढ़ा करके मतलब अपने से ऊंचा जगह पे उसको डॉक्टर या मास्टर जो भी बनना चाहे उसको हम बना सकते हैं।
We have to create as a society equal opportunities for children, equal opportunities on the one hand in terms of recognizing that they have minds of their own, they have volitions of their own, they know what is in their interest and welfare, consistent of course with their maturity as age progresses.
The nature and degree of psychological distress experienced by children with disabilities depends on a variety of factors such as the type and severity of the disability, support from families or caregivers, access to resources, and the environment they live in. Social stigma, discrimination or bullying may lead to anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. Additionally, children may encounter barriers to social participation or forming social connection, making them feel lonely and socially isolated. You see, while the legal frameworks are robust, there is always room for improvement in implementation. In fact, we have seen many positive impacts after the consultation over the decades, particularly in terms of policy creation and advocacy for inclusivity. Children's common justice problems are driven by exclusion, inaccessible justice, lack of prevention, barriers to identity, violence, limits to association and detention. These factors impact children individually and have collective structural equivalence. These are even more exacerbated for children with disability. The judiciary therefore has a crucial role in interpreting and enforcing the laws that protect children with disabilities.
यह दिव्यांग बच्चों की पुकार है। यह दिव्यांग बच्चों की आवाज़ उनके अनुभवों और उनकी उम्मीदों को दर्शाता है और परिवार, शिक्षक, स्वास्थ्य सेवाएं देने वाले, नीतियां बनाने वाले सभी से आग्रह करता है कि एक ऐसी दुनिया बनाई जाए जहां कोई भी बच्चा पीछे ना छूटे।
What is needed as on date is empathy. What is needed is compassion towards such children. And you can't inculcate such compassion or such empathy by just creating public awareness. Empathy has to come from within. Compassion has something to do with feelings. People with such compassion, people with empathy are the people who can do the best for children with such disabilities.
पिछले 2 वर्ष से स्कूल जाना स्टार्ट किया है, जिससे उसमें काफ़ी इम्प्रूवमेंट हम लोग को देखने को मिल रहा है। ये अपने आप को सहज हम लोग के साथ इसलिए फील करता है कि हम लोग के यहाँ पे जो बाल गृह में हैं वो एक कम्युनिटी, एक परिवार जैसे हैं, तो वो सबके साथ सहज महसूस करके बहुत अच्छे से ये कम्युनिकेट करता, बातचीत करता है, जिससे उसका स्पीच और भी अच्छा से डेवलप हो पा रहा है।
At the heart of the inclusion approach is the imperative to make sure that children with disabilities, organizations of people with disabilities are consulted, engaged, and listened to in anything that concerns them. At the end of the day, they are really the experts of their own experiences and therefore truly the best advocates and partners in this agenda.
हम समाज का हिस्सा बनना चाहते हैं, सड़कों, मॉल, पार्कों में जाना चाहते हैं और बाहर सुरक्षित महसूस करना चाहते हैं। हम सस्ते, सुलभ परिवहन और ऐसे शिक्षक चाहते हैं जो हमें समझें, ताकि हम भी सीख सकें और सफल हो सकें। परीक्षा के दौरान सहायक उपकरण हमें उचित अवसर देंगे।
As UNICEF commemorates its 75th year in India, we look forward to continue our journey together to advance the rights of every child in the country.
This documentary did make us realize the importance of empathy, that empathy has no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredibly healing message: you are not alone. I would now like to call upon Srimati Annapurna Devi, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, Government of India, to kindly address this august gathering.
नमस्कार। आज इस कार्यक्रम में उपस्थित मुख्य रूप से भारत के माननीय मुख्य न्यायाधीश श्री D.Y. चंद्रचूड़ जी, आदरणीय न्यायाधीश उच्चतम न्यायालय श्रीमती B.B. नागरत्ना जी, अध्यक्ष जुवेनाइल जस्टिस कमेटी, यूनिसेफ इंडिया की प्रतिनिधि श्रीमती सिंधिया जी, उच्च न्यायालय एवं उच्चतम न्यायालय के माननीय न्यायाधीशगण और देश के विभिन्न राज्यों से आए गणमान्य अतिथिगण, आज इस गरिमामयी सभा में हम सब एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर चर्चा करने के लिए एकत्रित हुए हैं। साथियों, बाल संरक्षण एक बड़ा ही व्यापक शब्द है और इसमें जब हमारे दिव्यांग बच्चों पर विशेष ध्यान दिया जा रहा है तो इस शब्द की व्यापकता और भी बढ़ जाती है। बाल संरक्षण का मुद्दा हम सबसे जुड़ा हुआ है। हमारी जनसंख्या में 1/3 से अधिक हिस्सा बच्चों का है। यहाँ यह सभा इस बात का प्रमाण है कि भारत अपने बच्चों की भलाई और सुरक्षा को कितना महत्व देता है। हमारे माननीय प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में हमारी सरकार प्रत्येक बच्चे को सुरक्षित और संरक्षित वातावरण प्रदान करने के लिए कृत संकल्पित है। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी की बाल संरक्षण के प्रति प्रतिबद्धता इस तथ्य में दिखाई देती है कि महिला एवं बाल विकास मंत्रालय के तहत बाल संरक्षण के लिए बजट आवंटन जो 2009-10 में लगभग 60 करोड़ था, उसको बढ़ाकर 2024-25 में लगभग 1500 करोड़ किया गया है। साथियों, हम सब ने बचपन की कुछ न कुछ चुनौतियों को महसूस किया है। हम सब ने देखा